Namaste, friends, and welcome to our Sunday edition of Words of Wisdom, Gyan Ganga, on the Virat Hindustan Sangam social media channels. And today we are got Dr. Subramanian Swamy and our friend Dr. Varun Sundaram discussing a very important subject on the COVID-19 vaccine. And both of them will let us know what are the issues involved and how efficient or effective will be the vaccine be. I have with me my colleague Professor Arvind Chaturvedi from Delhi and Mr. Ramesh Swamy, both my co-host for this Sunday program. And as you know, we conduct two weekly programs, one on Saturday, that is the Legal Words of Wisdom, Nyay Gyan Ganga on Saturdays at 8 p.m. Indian time. And today's is a regular Gyan Ganga, which we started on 2nd of April on Ram Navami Day. And our program goes on. Today, as I mentioned, we'll be discussing this important issue of the COVID vaccine, which has been being discussed in the media and social media. And today, Dr. Swamy has written a very interesting article in the Sunday Guardian, which is published from Delhi on the same subject about the COVID vaccine. Viewers can access it from our website as well as on the social media and on the in the Sunday Guardian online edition. I would like to introduce to you Dr. Varun Sundaram, who is the guest in today's program. Dr. Varun Sundaram is an assistant professor of medicine at the Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. He is also the director of the Advanced Heart Failure at the Louis Stokes Veteran Affairs Medical Center and a critical care cardiologist at the University Hospital Cleveland Medical Center. After qualifying from Sri Ramchandra Medical University or Ramchandra University in Chennai in India in 2007, Dr. Sundaram trained in internal medicine and cardiology at the Case Western Reserve University, Cleveland, US. He has completed the Global Clinical Scholars Research Training, that is known as GCSRT program at the Harvard Medical School in 2015. He has been associated in some research work and related medical subjects in United States and in the United Kingdoms, and he is presently, as I mentioned, based in the US. He has been awarded the prestigious Eric and Proitowski Early Career Research Award, and has his articles and his research papers have been published in numerous American journals of cardiology, etc. So we welcome Dr. Varun Sundaram to our program, and I would now request Dr. Swamy for his introductory remarks. But before that, I would thank our technical team led by Ashish Shetty, Vishal Mehta, our friend from Navi Mumbai, Ishwar Iyer, Swaminathan from Tamil Nadu, Tejas from Tejas from Pune, and our friend Rakesh Gadgi from Karnataka for their background support for putting this program together and their research on the subject. So with this, it is over to Dr. Swamy for his introductory remarks, and then we'll hear from Dr. Varun Sundaram on the COVID vaccine, and we welcome you all to this discussion on our Virat Hindustan Sangam channel. Over to Dr. Swamy.
Well, thank you very much, Jagdish. I'd rather call him Professor Varun Sundaram, because in the United States, assistant professor, associate professor, and full professors are all called professors. Because once you become assistant professor, it's only a matter of time before you become a full professor. It's called tenure. And so I think and he's in a very prestigious place. Case Reserve is not an ordinary place. It's very well known, very established. So he's a cardiologist. He's knowledgeable of the medical sciences. And while he's not specializing in virus and so on, but what knowledge he has is sufficient for us to appreciate what's going on just now in regard to finding vaccines for the COVID-19 pandemic. I would just say this much, that I'm very much concerned that a country like India, which has now demonstrated so much capability in corporate hospitals, in variety of different Ayurveda, homeopathic, and of course allopathic medicine capability, that in fact, if you go to any of our corporate hospitals, you will find people from Africa, Middle East, East Asia coming, for treatment, because we are still the cheapest producers of medical attention. So in this context, it's not that we are virus is something which is Greek and Latin to us. We have a long history. We have conquered most of the diseases the British left us with: cholera, smallpox, paralysis, polio, and so on. I mean, not completely, but in a huge way. And so in this context, I would like Professor Sundaram to tell us that there is right now two vaccines producers who have been identified. One is not a Swadeshi one, that is, it depends on a foreign production of vaccine, which they are mass producing in something called Serum Institute, which is in Pune, and the other is two couple who had got their PhDs from Wisconsin and have come back to India, and they have set up a Bharat Biotech, and they have already a substantial history of producing indigenously many medical medicines and so on. So therefore, in this context, I would like him to also apprise us. I mean, he is free to explain as he sees fit. We want to understand this whole concept of virus and the vaccine, and the two which are there, what they represent, what else is there, because according to a hearing which we are going to conduct in the Standing Committee of Parliament on this of health, Standing Committee for Health, of which I'm a member, and so at my suggestion, the committee has decided to hold hearings on this vaccine, and they have given me a background note for the conference starting tomorrow, for the hearing starting tomorrow, and they have listed 8 vaccine types which are presently at some stage of development in India. But of course, the Covaxin of the Bharat Biotech is already been given license, subject to their completing the ongoing phase 3. And Covishield, which is the otherwise known as the Oxford AZ vaccine, that has also been given. And the differences and the safety aspects and so on comparatively, I hope Professor Sundaram will keep us apprised, and we welcome him. He volunteered, he sweetly agreed. We just made a contact with him, and he said immediately, yes, I'll set aside time and come. So welcome, sir, and please speak as freely as you want. And we normally give half an hour at the beginning, then there's questions and answers.
So thank you for having me here. Thanks, Dr. Swamy, for the nice introduction. And it's truly an honor to be here. Many people know you as a politician. You actually come to me when I start analyzing techniques. When it says Maladaber's technique for propensity matching, you really come to my mind, someone who's debunked most of us, or the early work when you're 19 or 20, if I'm right.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so it is, that is something which I identify you with. So it's truly an honor to be around with and to be here with a really bright and dynamic, fearless personality. Thank you for having me here. So the vaccine, so I would start with this pandemic has, as you all know, it's had huge implications from health and economic implications and so many other issues. So in January 2020, the COVID virus was, the gene sequencing was first done early in China and it was released. And after which many companies have been working on or innovating vaccines to prevent COVID infection. So the vaccine, so why do we need vaccine in the first place is one, of course, first initially when the pandemic came, we didn't realize that it's going to last this long. I thought it would be, all of us, even in the medical community, thought it would be done within 6 months to 7 months, but it's lasted more than what we thought. And we are having second waves in the US, which is, I hope it doesn't spread as much, but the second waves have not been trivial in most states, especially in Ohio where we are. So vaccine is to confer immunity to the infection, to COVID infection, and the duration of immunity is something which we will know only by time. So what we hope for is for it to give an immunity for 1 to 2 years based on the mechanisms. That's what we think it's going to confer, the duration of immunity. So there have been many vaccines which are on work now, and I will talk about 4 vaccines, primarily Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca COVID vaccine, and the Bharat Biotech vaccine, the Covaxin. So starting with the Moderna vaccine is an mRNA vaccine, and I'll go into the depth of what it is. mRNA vaccine, where the phase 3 trial was published in a reputed medical journal, where they randomized 30,000 patients, all of them from US. It had around 5% Asians, but we call Asians as here, all the Chinese, Indians, everyone put together. So not much, I don't know how many of them were Indians in the first trial, Moderna trial. So 30,000 patients, and they showed a 94% vaccine efficacy. So what do we mean by vaccine efficacy? So the vaccine efficacy means, so let's say we take patients in the trial, we give them vaccine and we give them placebo. We look at the number of patients or number of volunteers who've had symptomatic COVID infection, not just antibody titers, but symptomatic COVID infection. And we look at the reduction after we have the numbers in both groups, we look at the percentage reduction. That's what we define as a vaccine efficacy. So the Moderna vaccine had 4% efficacy, and the safety profile was quite good for 2 months of follow-up. That's important to know. We have 2 months of follow-up. The trial will eventually follow them up to 2 years, but for now we have safety data for up to 2 months from the last dose. So, and the Pfizer vaccine is quite similar, an mRNA vaccine. They had around 44,000 patients or so, published again in a reputed journal, New England Journal of Medicine. And it showed a 95% vaccine efficacy rate in preventing symptomatic COVID infection. So the Pfizer vaccine, one of the issues in the first two, both Pfizer and Moderna are mRNA vaccines. The issues have been storage, especially in low and middle income countries. To transport it, logistically, it might be quite difficult. And for now, we have safety data for 2 months from the last dose, and it shows that you've not had any major issues with safety. We have had few local and systemic, small systemic reactions. So that's with the mRNA vaccines, both Pfizer and Moderna. Storage issues, but vaccine efficacy is, the evidence what we have is quite strong, showing a 95% vaccine efficacy rate. And evidence, I think, is beyond reasonable doubt for efficacy. For safety, for 2 months is safety. And then we come to the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccine were one large randomized trials. That is, you had common protocols for all patients, common measurements for outcomes. That is, all patients were measured for COVID infection in the same way, and common treatment protocols. The AstraZeneca COVID Oxford vaccine comes from Oxford Clinical Trials Unit, very reputable clinical trials unit known for innovating new trial methodologies in the last 3 or 4 decades. So what they have done is not one large randomized trial. The number which has been coded, the sample size of the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, is pooled analysis of 4 trials. And the efficacy data, what we have right now, what they published is the interim efficacy of 2 of those trials. It's not and the 2 trials where they showed the efficacy is 70%. And what the physician scientists have asked about that is some of the concerns among the statisticians is that the 70% is an average of 60% in the standard dose, an average of 90% in the low dose and standard dose, and it's an average of these 2, as opposed to a collective 95% of a whole large trial, what we had, the Pfizer and Moderna. So it is, during this pandemic, around July, a group of physicians and scientists, biostatisticians grouped together because of the nature of the pandemic. What they decided was to come up with certain kind of regulations to do pooled analysis of multiple clinical trials for COVID. One of the reasons being because of the nature of the changing epidemic. When they started recruiting in few hotspots, it turned out to be not hotspots, so sample size was an issue. So what they did was they came up with certain criteria to do pooled analysis. And of course, all of them were largely met in the Oxford trial. But one thing, it is debatable whether it is the same as one large randomized trial, so of what Pfizer and Moderna had done. So the 70% efficacy and the safety is we have for 3 months from the last dose. The safety is the same as what was observed with Pfizer and Moderna vaccine for 3 months from the last dose. And this is an adenovirus vaccine and a chimpanzee vaccine. One of the reasons why human adenovirus could not be used is because most of the humans, all of us, a large part of them are exposed to adenovirus, cold adenovirus, and we probably have neutralizing antibodies. So when you give the vaccine, if derived from human beings, it could neutralize and it could not have efficacy. So, but what do we have? What is the evidence for long-term safety with adenovirus vaccines? So from the vaccine per se, we have had Ebola, malaria vaccines, but we have not had phase 3 in the adenovirus chimpanzee vaccines. What we have evidence on safety is up to phase 2 in Ebola and malaria, the adenovirus vaccine. So both mRNA and adenovirus vaccine is reasonably, it's a relatively new formulation. Adenovirus has been used for gene therapy as a vector for gene therapies in other scenarios before. But in vaccines, it's been tested in Ebola and malaria up to phase 1 and phase 2. And finally, coming to the Bharat Biotech vaccine. So Bharat Biotech vaccine is an inactivated vaccine. And by inactivated vaccine, what do we mean? By inactivated vaccine they take loads of the virus, they give agents to completely inactivate the virus, but though the virus is inactive, you still have proteins within the virus which can stimulate a response from antibody response from the local human immune system, from the human body, antibody response. So that's what is our experience with inactivated vaccines. We have large experience with inactivated vaccines for the last 5-6 decades, starting from polio, rabies. So the safety profile is something which is quite comfortable with. And I was listening to the press briefing of Dr. Krishnala. He said that in 2019, there was a Gazette notification from the government that if for inactivated vaccines, with phase 2 evidence, you could apply for emergency use approval, or you could apply for approval, as opposed to the new formulations such as mRNA or adenovirus, where the long-term safety data is something which we are still figuring out. This is from his press briefing. So again, this is all with a preface. What I mentioned is I'm a physician scientist. I run a research team, but I'm not a vaccine expert. I'm telling it from the biostatistical perspective and from consumption at the population level. I do trials in cardiology, but from that, I'm trying to. So this is a brief overview of the vaccines we have: the mRNA vaccines, the adenovirus vaccines, and the inactivated vaccine. We have the Sputnik Russian vaccine, which is a protein vaccine. I'm not getting into that at this point of time. I understand that Reddy's laboratory is collaborating with them to produce it in India. So the mRNA vaccine, Pfizer and Moderna mRNA vaccines, efficacy of 95%, no safety concerns. Oxford vaccine pooled analysis of trials, while it was done as per what they've been, the regulatory agencies wanted them to do, but the efficacy is lower than what it was in Pfizer and Moderna, but higher than what it is required for any vaccines to be approved. 60% is what we use. And we have pooled analysis of 2 trials among the 4 for efficacy data, not all 4. So, and that is the interim analysis which has been published. And Bharat Biotech, we have today, I think the data on phase 2 is getting published, is what Dr. Krishna Ella had mentioned. January 10th is what he quoted. And I reviewed the early phase 1 evidence. They had 375 patients, and they've demonstrated adequate immune response for those 375 patients. And I see that he's outsourced the trial to be done by an American company, IQVIA. I have experience working with that company. They're a very reputable clinical trials company. I think he wanted to be doubly safe with every step what he's doing. So, and we are waiting for the, I think already they've recruited around 12, there's only 1,000 patients left to be recruited to complete the phase 3 trial. But of course, from the last date of recruitment, you'll have to wait for at least 6 weeks before seeing the safety data and efficacy response before being published. So that's where we stand with the evidence from vaccines.
Well, thank you very much. Let me ask you a sharp question.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the probability of safety of the 2 companies which have been given go ahead by the government of India?
Yeah.
And one is, of course, this what is called the Serum Institute's virus, which is essentially what the Oxford Oxford AZ vaccine, which is they're just coming here and mass producing it.
Yeah.
And the other is totally domestically produced vaccine by the Bharat biotech company. How would you rank the safety of the 2 in terms of probability?
Yeah. So the probability would be, so for the AstraZeneca vaccine, we have data for up to 3.5 months, which has been published, and then another 2 months from then. So it is any adverse events by this time we would have noted among the trial patients. So we have evidence until around 3.5 months published literature, and another 2 months we have to assume that we have not had any significant adverse events because it would have just been come out of interim analysis. So up to 5 months, what we've had, and published literature is what I could go with in Lancet. So there have the issues have been, as I told you, from the pooled analysis. For safety, we have all 4 trials. For efficacy, we have 2 trials. So in the AstraZeneca. So among that, we have not had major adverse reactions. This is for short term. And for Bharat Biotech vaccine, Covaxin, for long term, I think it's hard to say with AstraZeneca. For Bharat Biotech, because it's an inactivated vaccine, and we have long term, we really have long term data on inactivated vaccine. So it is it's just an educated guess would be the long term, because of our experience, the inactivated vaccine, the safety data ought to be quite good, but we have to wait for the published literature, as I mentioned. So, and the inactivated vaccine, so the vaccine theoretically, so is in theoretically not in a large amount of patients, can by itself cause infection or accelerated response to subsequent infection in long term. That is a theoretical risk or even practical risk with previous. But with inactivated vaccine, the virus is inactive. So as a consequence, uh, it is unlikely to cause serious systemic infection with repeated exposure. So that is another safety thing with inactivated vaccines. So that's short-term data with published literature we have with Oxford, no major concerns, only local and systemic reactions. For long-term data, I mean, of course, we had to approve. I mean, regulators had to approve. We'll have to wait to see. But we have more experience with inactivated vaccines.
Okay. Let me ask you a question as a politician.
Yeah.
Because you're being a scholar, you make sure that you don't paint the whole thing black and white. You want to see the shades of gray too.
Yeah.
But if I were to select a vaccine to take, do I take both of them as equally effective, or as an Indian, or one would be preferred to the other?
So yeah, so it is. If it comes to safety, absolutely, I would actually. We have enough evidence even with Bharat Biotech. With efficacy data, the only I don't know what the reason would be. The criticism what I would have is or maybe something which is out of beyond my understanding, is while Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine just jumped and published the interim analysis of pooled of pooled 4 randomized trials. The interim analysis of Bharat Biotech probably would have had even more number of patients, and it's large randomized 1 trial. So the regulators would probably have, to an extent, an idea, because the data must have been presented to the regulators. My gut feeling is they would have not gone to this level to approve. I mean, of course, you actually had to really push it, but for them to have a look to unless there was efficacy issue, because that data is only available for them, so available to them. So what? Because you have more than 24,000 patients, from what I understand now, from what Dr. Krishna is, and the other randomization he said would be completed in 2 days. The other 1,200, 1,300 patients. So it's just a matter of, I would say, few weeks and a couple of weeks until we have the immunogenicity information and the regulators. That question, I'm sure you have direct call, you have direct access to some of the regulators who will be able to give you that information. But I have to say that if they had approved, they probably saw something in it, because it's just not published. I don't know. What I'm going to tell you is an educated guess that it's actually just as good, but it's an educated guess.
Okay, second question, and then I'll hand over to my other colleagues to ask questions. Why is it that the United States Food and Drug Administration not cleared the British, the Oxford AZ yet?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and so has EMA, European Medical Agency.
Yes,
approved Moderna on January 6th, but has not. So, it's not the Oxford vaccine. When it comes to efficacy, I don't know how biologically even the investigators, we have not come up with a very valid explanation of how in the 2-dose regimen, the low dose followed by standard dose had an efficacy of 90%, whereas standard dose followed by standard dose had an efficacy of 60%. So we have not found an explanation for it yet. So the arguments in favor could be the 60% efficacy was observed in all 2 trials among the pooled data, that is from Brazil and UK. But as a statistician, you would know that these things are not powered for. So it was not powered to answer within doses, because it's powered to answer the entire efficacy as opposed to two groups within it. So that is something which we are not able to explain why. A low dose followed by a standard dose, you have 90%, whereas standard dose followed by a standard dose, you have 60%. That is something I'm not able to come up with a biological explanation, and neither do immunologists. So that is one. And the second thing is, it is not the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. The evidence, I could hardly come up with any criticism in the way in which the trial was performed. So it's a very large trial, and one large trial with efficacy data and safety data. So with no multiple doses, just one dose of initial dose and booster dose, the same dose was given, and so it is a very clear cut, a simple choice for the regulators to make when they have the option of Pfizer and Moderna.
I'm sorry, I have to ask one more question.
Yeah, sure.
The audience has sent me two questions, or sent us on the screen. One is, what advice would you give for age groups?
Yeah.
Or do you think that all age groups are equally eligible without any further precautions? And the other is, what about those with diabetes and cardiac problems and so on, what they call as comorbidities like diabetes and high blood pressure? So what would you advise on that? And then definitely I won't ask you any more questions.
No, you can feel. So I will go by the three trials, the published literature, what we have on age groups. The initial trials, both Pfizer and Moderna, had included a reasonable number of patients. I would say Moderna, if I'm right, 20% of patients were above the age of 65. So reasonable number. And our Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine included, I think, in reasonable number of patients. In percentages, it's in single digits, above patients above 70. So one thing which you have observed is the low level, the systemic and local infection, also local reaction rates have not been higher for elderly. In fact, it has actually been on the lower side, though it's not powered to answer the differences between age. It's been quite safe in elderly. So the safety is not an issue. Now, coming to efficacy, what we know is the elderly group with diabetes, cardiac conditions like cardiac conditions, and other obesity and major issues, hypertension and other non-communicable disease or history of lung disease before, have increased risk of deaths once if they've been contracted with COVID. So the case fatality rate is very high in this group as opposed to the younger group. So if, as a consequence, it would make sense to expose this high-risk group first to the vaccine, given that we have good safety data with elderly, and we know that these are the group who are likely to have any kind of case fatality. So good safety data and high risk, so it makes sense that the elderly group and the group with comorbidities to be exposed to these vaccines first. And we have enough evidence to do it with reasonable certainty.
Good. Jagdish, it's all yours now.
So okay, Arvind, go ahead.
I have a question, which is an extension of the questions that Dr. Swamy had asked. We talk about 70% efficacy for both Bharat Biotech and Oxford one in India. Is there any evidence or is there any data available which gives us the age-wise breakup of efficacy? Because when these experiments are conducted, they are conducted across the random sample. And of course, random sample will include different age groups, number one. Number two, when these experiments are conducted about two doses, you said small doses, standard dose, low dose is standard dose. So there will be four groups: low, standard, standard, low, standard, standard, and low, low. So is there any data available on these four groups across the age groups, which may say we can identify one cluster where the efficacy is maximum and another cluster where the efficacy is the least?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Regarding the dose from, it's been a standard dose for Pfizer and Moderna and for Bharat Biotech too. The two doses what they've been giving. In Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, I was reading the trial in depth in Lancet. So there were two dose regimens. One was a low dose and standard dose, and another dose was a standard dose and standard dose. I'm talking about the first and second dose. The first dose being low dose, and the second dose being standard dose. And the second regimen was first and second dose, both being standard dose. So two regimens. But after the initial phase 1 trial, the investigators decided to move towards halfway through the trial to just standard dose and standard dose formulation. In fact, one of the editorials to that vaccine in Lancet mentions that a subcohort in UK, the same words, I'm quoting the words, inadvertently gave low dose for some time before the investigators could convert to standard dose. And that is the cohort where we are quoting the 90% efficacy. So who had received the low dose and standard dose cohort. That is with the doses, to your question. Coming to the age, so we have looked at to see if the effect size is different across age groups in subgroups. That's going to be hypothesis generating, not hypothesis testing. So, but in subgroups, what we have noticed is, there's no difference in effect size across age groups. So despite difference in immunogenicity, we have not seen, that is in the phase 2 trials, we noticed some difference in immunogenicity, but in the phase 3 trials, the effect size doesn't seem to vary significantly across the groups. But one thing which I observed while deconstructing the trials was that all three trials had the placebo group, and in the placebo group there were roughly 480 infections, 480 systemic COVID infections, symptomatic COVID infections. But what was surprising to me is, because I made an Excel sheet and tried to deconstruct it, like what probably you statisticians and economists would do. So among the 480 patients, there were less than 3 or 4 deaths. So that tells me a case fatality rate of 1% in the placebo group who have been infected with COVID in countries like, say, US and others, where we know the case fatality rate is much higher. So I don't know what would explain this. Either did they not include, though they called it high risk, were they not truly the high risk, what we see in real world practice? So that is something, because 3 deaths out of 480 seems like a very low number, less than 1%, which of death rates among those who have been infected with COVID in the trial, in the placebo group. So that gives us a sense of how sick the trial population are, or what is the comorbidity or the other burden the trial populations have had. So those 2 doses, as I mentioned, are a difference in effect size. Age-wise, no difference in effect size. 3, to the comorbidities. The comorbidity burden, though mentioned in the trial, we all do clinical trials to an extent. So the comorbidity burden mentioned is not translated into the death rates even in the placebo group. And I'm not able to explain that. And I searched, people have not talked about this much. So, and I'm very curious to see what the death rates would be in Bharat Biotech in the placebo group.
Okay. Jagdish ji?
Okay. Yeah, I have a question which is just on the screen. Dr. Varun.
Yeah.
Is the vaccine must for COVID infected person?
Yeah. So that is another very good question. So what we don't know about COVID infected person is, one, so we don't know what is the level of natural immunity they have achieved, because you have standard doses with the vaccines and it's going to give you a certain level of immunity. The natural immunity is going to be largely based on the severity of infection, the viral load, what you call, which has been, the person had, the level of antibody response they could generate based on their immune system. So there are lots of variables which could play here. So as a consequence, we are not sure how long the immunity is going to last. So it makes sense, regardless of prior COVID infection, whether or not to go ahead with the vaccine. And they've shown in the trials, 2 to 3% of patients in the trials had prior COVID infection. And they've demonstrated safety in this group of 3% who have had prior COVID infection to get COVID vaccine. They've been quite safe and the same efficacy rates.
Can I?
Ramesh,
Oh, yeah, okay.
okay,
Go ahead.
I have a question.
No problem. Go ahead.
Which is, I don't know whether medically it sounds this thing. The general feeling is in India, the mortality rate has been quite good as far as fighting COVID
Quite
is
low, you mean? Quite low.
quite low. Mortality rate has been quite low. So some people feel, should we take the vaccine, or because of the mortality rate being low, we can ignore the vaccine? What is the better option?
Yeah.
A lot of viewers have this question.
Yeah.
Good question.
So it is actually a very good question. So because even we trying to break our minds to see why the mortality is low. So we don't know. And in fact, I could say that the number of cases diagnosed are probably, the denominator is actually lower in the mortality rate. Probably we have underdiagnosed, but the mortality in India has probably picked up well. So the deaths, probably all of you would agree that in India, it's very difficult to hide deaths because we are all it's not an individualistic society. Everyone knows what the neighbor is doing. So the deaths are quite easily reported. So then the case fatality rate or the mortality rate, what it's quoted, is probably an overestimate. It's probably even lower than that. So I was talking to my brother who's COVID in India. He's in Tiruchi. He's actually he's opened up COVID centers. So he told me that there were patients who were being admitted now. We have to test for COVID for all of them in his hospital in Tiruchi. So what he observed was, to do the COVID testing is 3,000 rupees. To do the antibody testing is 450 rupees. So it's cheaper to do the antibody test first and see if they have antibody. You could defer COVID testing. So it's because you have to look at patients pay from the pocket to come with innovative ways of doing it. I'm always amazed with how our guys could come with innovative ways of doing it. And what he observed was, again, this is from anecdotal evidence, I don't have, that a large part of patients who have come into the hospital have had antibodies. That means a huge amount of population has been infected. We have just not picked up. So the mortality rate, whatever is quoted, is probably an overestimate. So it is, and we're really puzzled.
It's lower than what we are publishing?
Yeah, it's probably lower than what we are publishing. Because the number of infected cases in the denominator, the mortality rate would be number of deaths divided by number of patients diagnosed. But for us, the number of patients diagnosed is an underestimate here. So because we've not, compared to the West. So, but the mortality, the numerator is not underdiagnosed because we are pretty good in picking up deaths.
That's right.
In India.
We have lots of ceremonies and all that.
Yeah. Ceremony, funerals, everyone knows all of what's happening in everyone's house. So in the denominator, now with experience, seeing this wide range of patients having antibodies positive who are coming for other regular treatment reasons, that means what they've been infected, they didn't even know that they've been infected. So
no, Dr. Varun, does it mean that those who have developed antibodies, they do not need any vaccination? Supplementing Jagdish's question.
Yeah, so that's a good question. But the issue is, those who have antibodies, we don't know how long that antibodies is going to last. So with vaccination, these trials, we are going to follow it for 2 years. So now we have data for up to 2 months. So based on historical evidence, what we anticipate is it would last anywhere from 1 to 2 years, antibodies. And we hope that the epidemic or the pandemic is done in that 1 year. So it would still make sense, probably not to test antibodies, whether there's evidence, if it's safe in those who've had prior antibodies to get vaccine. We know that from the trials have recruited these patients, and we have not noticed adverse effects in these group of patients who've had prior antibodies. So coming back to your mortality thing, it's actually really puzzling. So, we don't know the reason why. And I have my own reasons, not scientific, but I think they might be. The mortality rate among Indians in London and in England who I've been talking to is not that low. It's a mortality rate in India is low. The same Indians abroad has not necessarily been that low. So that I would attribute that to, I don't know, it's just a guess, and again, an educated guess. So most of the people living abroad Indians living abroad will figure out. I always used to read in road shops in India, and I still love eating it. I never used to have any upset tummies when I was in India. After coming here for a few years, I think I've lost all my immunity. When I go back, now I have upset tummy. We are all very careful about what we're eating, so maybe, so I have to go back to street food in India. When I go, make sure I eat every day to build my immunity. So probably it has to do with immunity or the diet, or I don't know what exactly it is. So, I mean, that is something which is hard to explain. I might have to think that it's probably, something to do with immunity, and maybe our diet. We've been actually consuming certain kind of spices which does not have taste value for 2,000, 3,000 years. I ought to think that they probably were started for some medicinal reasons. It's just again it's not based on scientific data. It's just my view.
Okay.
So my question is, so first thing, a dumb question. What is a viral load?
Yeah.
That's the question somebody asked. Somebody, it's not.
No, it's not a dumb question at all.
It's not so dumb. It's not so dumb because I don't know what viral load is.
Yeah, it's not a dumb question at all. So the viral load, let me take the example of HIV, where we know the evidence well. So you have a certain level of viral load above which you manifest systemic infection, signs and symptoms of infection. So in patients with HIV, what we do is we treat them with medications to make sure that the viral load is quite low, so that they don't manifest AIDS, what we call the systemic infection of HIV. So the viral load is used, it will tell you the manifestation of whatever, how we actually present with that infection. And the second thing is, in certain diseases, we use it to monitor therapy, like the HIV. Yeah.
Is it like parts per million? We call in chemistry.
Yeah, it's like that, 10 to the power of 6, 10 to the power of 5, based on whatever. So it is like similar to that. Yeah, it's a number of copies of virus.
Number of copies of virus per droplet, or some measure of blood or something.
Yeah. Some it's there's laboratory variation, but yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
Okay. So the other question is, again, that one of the comments that came here was, which I also had, was, does this vaccine, let's say the Moderna, Pfizer, and AstraZeneca, was it built for a certain type of a DNA strain? Because the Indian DNA strain is different. Would that be as effective as it is on a Caucasian here in the US as a person in India? Or is that really doesn't matter? The DNA doesn't matter because it attaches, the approach is different.
So
genetically, basically, I mean, from the genetic difference, would it be effective?
Genetic difference. In general, with therapeutics, I will talk about therapeutics in general, the medications, what we use. I have learned of late from, and I think we have underestimated this for all these years, is in cardiology, the early trials, almost more than 90% had Caucasians. And we have tested a certain level of dose, say for heart failure or coronary artery disease. We've tested a certain level of dose. Say if there's one drug, we use 50 milligram dose for heart failure. And then talking to my friends and my brother, I actually have been pushing that level of dose. They tell me that they don't even tolerate 5 milligrams of the 50 milligram therapeutic dose, Indians. Their blood pressure drops even with 5 to 10 milligrams. So there is definite genetic or variation in response to medications in general. Because we have not tested or tried these drugs in India, or the trials at least in 1990s did not include many patients out of US. Of late, the recruitment in US has been, for major trials, has been only 20 to 30%. As opposed to, it's more easy to recruit patients from outside US as opposed to in US and in Western Europe. So there is a genetic response or variation. And I believe that at least from my cardiology experience, I could say that Indians, the dose what they respond to is actually, the response is very different than what it is here. In vaccines, that question is yet to be answered if the new vaccine. And coming to the, I think you are talking about the mutation or whether the vaccine,
Right.
So the mutation, the new mutant strains. So this is, again, I'm quoting what I read as opposed to my own knowledge on immunology in this mutants. So the mutant strain is, now we've had issues with mutant strain from UK and in South Africa. So it is what we believe is to the spike protein. And the spike protein is what has been the target of even the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine and the earlier other vaccines too. Whereas one advantage of Bharat Biotech could theoretically, we'll have to wait for phase 3 trials and others, because it's an inactivated vaccine. It does not just confer immunity to just spike proteins, even to other 3-4 proteins. So theoretically, it should be superior for the mutant strains compared to the other vaccines. So that is, so that is from what I understand, and again, it's from what I read, as opposed to my own knowledge or creation of knowledge. It's just disseminating what I've read. So previous vaccines have shown that with the inactivated vaccine, conferring protection to multiple proteins. So Bharat Biotech, the Covaxin, should probably be more superior to mutant strains. That is another added advantage of Covaxin over previous other vaccines.
So basically, I have to fly to India to get my vaccine.
So I think my gut feeling is by February, March, you'll have the phase 3 trial published. Today, we were supposed to get the phase 2 trial from of Covaxin and phase 3 trial. And if the efficacy is above 60% or 70%, which I think would be, it is, that would, and being an inactivated vaccine, it would be a huge, it would be something really big for a vaccine manufactured in India. So the reason being, so in January 2020 is when we had the sequence, the genetic sequence, which came up. And within 1 year, I have to, take all companies, including, Pfizer, Moderna, Oxford vaccines, within 1 year, you've sequenced the gene, you've done phase 1 to phase 3 trials, upscaling the manufacturing and getting it published, post-marketing surveillance, even for the early vaccines. But one difference is, I know how difficult it is to do it in India. So the company has to be really applauded to be taking this risk, this level of risk, to give it to a third party like IQVIA, and to do it in the right way. And it's a huge risk, and probably it's a new formulation as opposed to previous old formulations in other drugs. So they have taken a huge risk, I would say. And if the phase 3 trials shows the same level of efficacy, that will be a big, huge. I would really applaud them for having taken the risk and being able to pull it off within a year with not adequate infrastructure like what other countries do. Yeah.
Dr. Swamy, you had a question?
Yeah, it's a bit, what shall I say? I don't want to get you into trouble, but I'm going to ask you a question. And from what I've been listening to you, I feel I should come to a conclusion that India could have concentrated on this inactive
Inactivated vaccine. Yeah.
Vaccine, and given the whole thing to it, instead of even bothering about importing anything from abroad.
Yeah, so importing, you would mean, because my understanding is the Serum Institute has been producing it there.
But the Oxford AZ is imported.
Is imported, yeah.
No,
we are only mass producing for them.
Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Swamy, go ahead.
We are only mass producing for them.
Fair.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a contract manufacturer.
Exporting. You see, the question is, we have a huge population. We don't need to export.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is so. To your thing, and I will be very objective and very honest about what I think in this. So, I would really like to know. Maybe it's because something. Why we probably maybe there's a valid reason. I just don't know why Covaxin could have not taken the same route of just publishing the interim results rather than waiting for the final results, like what Oxford AstraZeneca did. That would have really pushed it further. And I'm sure the regulators would have looked at the efficacy, safety. So there should not have been a major issue. So if there's probably a valid reason or something which I don't understand, but when Oxford AstraZeneca did it, if we had pushed it, they started in November. Maybe there's some logistics, or maybe there's not. They wanted to do it the right way, the proper way, like what Pfizer and Moderna did. Maybe they're waiting it because they're going to be under more scrutiny than other companies, I would guess. So they wanted to be.
International cartel will be after them.
Yeah. So it is. So the interim analysis. That's been my one criticism of why probably maybe they could have gone the route of publishing the interim analysis, or did they not get enough event rates for the interim analysis? I don't know. So that is something. Maybe there is a reason, but it's not very apparent to me. After I tried to deconstruct the trials quite in depth, but I couldn't actually figure out any logical reason why it could not be done. If that was done, I think what you're saying is. Then it's because right now I'm blinded with only the regulators having the data on efficacy. What I'm going to say on the efficacy, not safety, on the efficacy standpoint, 60% or 70% or whatever I'm going to say is going to be a guesstimate.
Yeah. So, well, I got a question to ask for the committee in the committee meeting when these people are summoned to give testimony. So I'll ask your question. Why didn't they publish the
interim analysis? So because the Oxford were the 4 trials, the total number of patients were 23,000 or 24,000.
Yeah, that's right.
And but the efficacy analysis was of 2 trials from that, which is around 11,200 patients. I calculated myself. So it's 11,200 patients. I can send an email to you on that. So 11,200 patients. So
yeah, you can send me any number of questions that I should ask in the hearing. I'm a man as far as the subject is concerned.
So 11,200 patients.
I have one more question.
Yeah, 1 minute. Let me finish quickly.
Sure.
Because I'm just following. A couple of things. One is technical and the other is policy related. The first one is, why is adenovirus a more new technology, higher risk in terms of rather than the one that Bharat Biotech uses?
Yeah. So both the mRNA and adenovirus are, we have not had phase 3 trials of previous vaccines using this. Adenovirus, what has been done is for gene vector in oncology that is being used to an extent. And we've used adenovirus to an extent in cardiology for adenovirus for gene therapies in cardiology, in heart failure, especially in my area. And where the trials lasted for around there was no efficacy in improving heart failure, but that's a total different field. But in the trial follow-up, we have not seen any safety concerns in the adenovirus. So this is in heart failure. But in vaccine, phase 3 trials, we don't have evidence. We have phase 1, phase 2 from Ebola and malaria. And mRNA is also new technology. So far, the safety, we have around 3 months. Whereas here, this is a proven, my understanding is that Bharat Biotech, the inactivated vaccine, is a proven technology in terms of safety is concerned.
Okay. So the policy side, when a lot of people are saying, is it at what level should 100% of the population be vaccinated, or at 60, it is good enough so that the virus stops spreading? I mean, that's the first part of the question. Second, this Dr. Swamy can answer. Can government mandate that everybody should be vaccinated, or what is that thin line between where the government intervenes and says and dictates things like that? You can take the first question, Varun, and then Dr.
Yeah.
Swamy can take
So the first question is 60% enough? Is what?
Yeah, basically, do 100% of the population need to be vaccinated, or at what level that the virus stops spreading?
Yeah. So I don't know a very accurate answer to it, but I'll go with what we've used for herd immunity before. What proportion of the population had to be infected? So that is around, based on historical evidence, anywhere from around 60% or so, 60 to 65%. From vaccination, this is a pandemic, totally untested area, and it's lasted much longer than what we thought. And just when we thought the positivity rates were low, it's just starts coming back. So it's actually really surprised us multiple ways. So it is something. So the correct number is something which we are not sure. So it is two things. One is to vaccinate the high-risk population, that is those with comorbidities and elderlies who are likely to have fatality from COVID. That is to prevent deaths. And the second thing is active young community to prevent transmission, because they could be carriers and they could still continue to transmit. Because for some reason, we are not able to break the phenomena. So even countries which have gone the herd immunity route have done really terribly. Sweden, that's what happened to Sweden. It's turned out to be a wrong calculation. In retrospect, everything is easy to make. So that number is quite unclear. So, but the thing is, and coming to mandating the population to do vaccine, and I don't know whether that could be done, but Dr. Swamy could answer that question. From the policy perspective, I have no clue. So I'm largely from the a mechanistic and trialist. So this thing I don't get into. That's something I'll wait for Dr. Swamy to answer.
I won't be able to answer it today.
I have a question.
Yeah.
My question is the approval given by the government of India for both Bharat Biotech and AstraZeneca. This is emergency use approval. It is not a final approval. One. Second question is, just before the government asked these two rival companies to sit together and address a joint press conference about the efficacy, about both the vaccines, both of them were accusing each other about the quality. So the one company said the other vaccine is only water. There's not going to be very effective. Now, this has raised some kind of suspicion in the minds of Indians who are going to use it.
Yeah.
So what do you say about this?
So, I understand it's created a lot of anxiety and suspicion about vaccine, because when I'm talking to, my friends and family back home, I could see that anxiety about, which one to choose and which one to pick. Things are not clear. So, I don't know whether if we look objective, extremely objective about it, the advantage of where Oxford AstraZeneca is they have published the phase 3 literature, and it's up for criticism for everyone, for the scientific and public community. So it is something which we could, there's supplementary files in the journals and everything we could really deconstruct and criticize. So the scientific community would ask, we are not able to put the same level of scrutiny, or scientific scrutiny, for Covaxin because we now have access to data. So that is one. But that does not mean, and data I'm saying in terms of efficacy. Safety is, I think, is not an issue here. So safety with Bharat Biotech, I think that's not a big issue here. I'm talking about efficacy rates. Even when Dr. Krishnella was giving the press briefing some time ago, he mentioned that the efficacy is something he doesn't have the numbers at this point of time. So probably the regulators do. He cannot. So that is the reason for scrutiny, because of not lack of data. Its data is still not yet available. It's going to come out. That's one. And the second thing is, but that doesn't mean you can say it's water. So it is. I don't think you could say that it's water, because if we don't have access to the data or this thing, I'm sure even the other company, the competitive company probably also, unless they know someone, probably does not have access to the, if they have access to the data, then there's something wrong if the competitive company to say that it's water. So
if you're used to Indian water, you will get a lot of immunity, I can tell you.
That's right. So lack of Indian water is what actually gives us upset tummy when we come back home.
So, Dr. Swamy, one thing which is strange in this whole.
I hope you're not overtraining him. Is almost an hour. Anyway, one last question.
Okay. So the thing was, the U.S. government has given immunity to Pfizer and Moderna against lawsuits, in the sense that you, if you get vaccinated and if you have an adverse reaction or something, you actually cannot sue the companies. But you can actually apply for compensation where literally nobody has ever got paid. I mean, like 6% of the cases got paid. That's what studies say, that they've set up some fund. The government has set up some fund so that if you have some adverse reaction. Is there something, I mean, is this blanket, this is more for Dr. Swamy because it's a legal question. Is this blanket immunity a good approach? And does India have that kind of an approach?
No, not yet. And I think I'll answer this question after the committee hearings.
Okay.
I'll ask this question.
Yeah. So to that thing, one is a post-marketing surveillance data. So, as you all know, there are phase 0 to phase 4 trials. Actually, some don't have phase 0, so 5 phases, if you want to say. So the phase 4 trial, the post-marketing surveillance of Pfizer and Moderna in US. So there were some, not a lot, like 1 in a million or so, 1 in 900,000 patients with anaphylactoid reactions, and 2 healthcare workers in UK after getting the vaccine had anaphylactoid reactions. Looks like.
What is anaphylactoid?
Is serious allergic reactions.
Serious.
So it's not just a subtle allergy like a skin site, but serious allergic reactions which requires immediate intervention. So
like an EpiPen.
EpiPen or shot, most likely. So the post-marketing surveillance is mandated in trials, and the difference between other trials and vaccination trials, from the trial perspective, what I'm saying is, because the reach is huge, so even if it is a small 0.01% adverse event rate in absolute numbers, because we have the 2 statisticians would know much more than me in this. In absolute numbers, even with say I have a heart failure drug, the reach is going to be maximum 5 million in US, whereas in vaccination, it's going to be 200 or 220 million. So 0.001% adverse effect would translate into, in absolute numbers, still meaningful numbers, and it can create a lot of press. So where it's not probably a common adverse effect, but still a point, because the reach is the penetration is going to be huge for this drug. A small number will translate into an absolute numbers reasonable size.
Thank you.
Before Arvind wraps up the show, I have a question from viewers. Both Ramesh Swamy and Dr. Varun Sundaram, you are based in the US. Do you have a choice of what vaccine, which company vaccine to take in the United States, or is it compulsory you will be given a vaccine when you have to begin?
Yeah, I don't know.
My daughter got it. She didn't have a choice. She just went to a center and they just gave her Moderna. That's it.
So we didn't have a choice, but then we were the first ones to be vaccinated here. I mean, I'm also part of the federal system in healthcare system. So we got I got Pfizer.
So your both doses are done, Varun?
Sorry?
Both doses are done for you?
Both doses are done, yeah. So Friday was my second dose. Yeah.
Are you aware what's happening in the UK? Is there a choice, or you can choose your vaccine?
I don't think you can choose in UK too, from what I spoke to my friends, but maybe it's changed recently, but I don't know. Until 2 weeks ago, that was not the case.
Well, is it I mean, more from a perspective, but is the choice, I mean, I guess it is too difficult to give you a choice, right? Because it's an emergency thing, right? You cannot say, okay, I'm going to...
because the manufacturing is an issue. But looking from the trial perspective in US, Pfizer and Moderna kind of equivalent in efficacy and safety.
Okay.
So it really doesn't matter as much.
And India's perspective, Dr. Swamy, I think we have the evidence is clear today from our discussions.
Yes, that's right.
So evidence is, I mean, I think tomorrow
A
maybe.
layman, no. Dr. Varun, we're not pushing it on you.
No. What I'm saying is safety evidence is, without doubt, tomorrow maybe in the standing committee, you will have more information about efficacy than what I do. Here, efficacy is, I'm making an educated guess, but I've made a reason why inactivated vaccines could be safer and in the long term. And then the entire trial, from what I understand, is actually tested in Indian population.
Yeah, that is a good point. Actually, a very good point.
The
Actually,
entire trial is tested in Indian population for the dose and immunogenicity, everything. So if you're going to look at certainty-wise, I mean, of course, if the phase 3 trials have come, and once it comes and we have if the evidence shows the same level of efficacy what we expect, then of course, at that time, we can say with reasonable certainty. But phase 3 trials, yeah.
okay. Arvindji, you get close.
Before we wind up,
One
I have
second.
a
Jagdishji, go ahead.
political issue to Dr. Swamy.
Jagdishi wants to say something before you.
I want to tell our viewers that Dr. Swamy will be attending the Standing Committee of Health Ministry, and many of your views which you have expressed in the question or in the comment column, Dr. Swamy in some way or the other will select and raise some of these points. So this is just to tell the viewers that some of your information which you have shared and with Dr. Varun Sundaram has shared, that will be a lot of background material for Dr. Swamy to raise, and we will analyze the material which is available. Okay, I'm sorry I interrupted this question.
Dr. Varun, quickly, what kind of anaphylactic reactions can people expect? I mean, in the sense that, when you say allergic, severe allergic, what kind of, is it like?
Acute breathing issues, drop in blood pressure. Acute breathing issues, drop in blood pressure.
Okay.
It's but very rare, extremely rare so far. But there's something to watch for.
Okay. Thank you. Arvindji, go ahead.
We are already running out of time.
Currently in UK, there's someone who's actually.
Yeah, there's no choice in UK, by the way. They have to take this Oxford thing.
Yeah, some viewer from UK just put in his comment.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Arvind.
Yeah, Dr. Swamy, I just wanted to ask you your comment on this controversy about the cost of this vaccination, whether it is coming from the central government or it is coming from the state government. Many state governments today, for example, Mamta announced that in her state it is going to be free. Kejriwal wants the center to, compensate for the money in Delhi, and whether state government will bear the cost or central government will bear the cost. In Bihar elections, BJP had announced that it will be free for Bihar. What about rest of India? Is there any issue on this?
Well, I'll find out in the committee meeting, because this is something is new to me, what you're just saying. I mean, I don't go by politicians' statements. They make all the statements all the time and move on. But who's financing, if at all, these companies? And on that basis, I'll be able to answer your question next time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think this discussion, which had hundreds of questions from the viewers, the kind of reactions that we are getting from the viewers, and the reactions about the quality of the discussion, viewers are much richer in terms of information and knowledge after this. And this is the evidence from the kind of reactions that we have got. People are very happy with this kind of discussion. Of course, it leaves many more questions, and I'm afraid the time is not permitting us to go ahead. And there are many other issues. Some issues may be political, as I said earlier, and these political issues need political answers. We thank Dr. Subramanian Swamy for sparing time for today's discussion. We thank Dr. Varun Sundaram for giving such a information, which I don't think in any other discussion it would have been possible easily. And it is really a very rich discussion. Thank you very much, both the experts and my co-host Jagdish Shetty, Ramesh Swamy, and the technical team led by Ashish Shetty, Tejas, Swaminathan, Vishal Mehta, Ishwar Iyer, and Gadki Rakesh. This show, I'm sure, will be replicated many times by people, and this is really a good piece of information. We will be meeting again next Saturday in Nyaya Gyan Ganga, or Legal Words of Wisdom, and again on Sunday with a new topic with Dr. Subramanian Swamy in Words of Wisdom, Gyan Ganga. Thank you, viewers, for supporting us. We'll be meeting Saturday again. Thank you. Namaskar. Jai Hind.
Thank you.
Jai Hind.